This video is going to look at the basic module and some of the folders and files that are important and will help you get up to speed quickly. The build and dist folders are generated by Eclipse and Ant. They'll include class files that you don't need to worry about. The dist folder is built by Ant and it contains the compiled OMod, which is the distributable module file. The lib and libcommon folders contain jar files that your project requires. Any jar file that is already in OpenMRS or is expected to be installed before your module is there would go in libcommon. Any jar file that your module needs to ship with and it does not expect that is included in OpenMRS will go in the lib folder, and all jars in the lib folder are compiled into the OMod by Ant automatically. The metadata folder contains different information about your module pertaining to setup and the database and internationalization. The config file is the all-important file that tells OpenMRS what your module is all about. So you've got your internal ID that should be unique and it's similar to your Java package name. The name of your module is a displayable string that you'd see on the admin interface when loading and unloading modules. Your module can be versioned. Your package name is all listed out. The author, description, those are things displayed on the admin page. The Activator is a Java file that is called at startup and shutdown of your module. If we look at the basic module Activator, we'll see that it just has a startup method and a shutdown method, and each of these are called when the module is started and stopped. The update URL element is commented out right now, but it typically points at the module repository that you see here. And this is the typical URL where you can find the update script. And that's generated automatically for you when you upload your OMod to the module repository. A module can require that a certain version of OpenMRS be installed in order to run your module, and this version typically corresponds to the OpenMRS API jar version here, but it doesn't necessarily have to. This version would need to change if my module is depending on new methods in this API version, so that I can be guaranteed that those methods will exist in whatever environment this module is loaded in. Extensions are ways for module to insert content into web pages in OpenMRS. So the different pages in OpenMRS define extension points, and those points are essentially just hooks for your module to extend. So you would define an extension that extends a point. So there's a point defined. This is just a string that is defined in OpenMRS on the admin index page. And every time this page is viewed, this point is called for all modules that are loaded and looped over, and this class is called and displayed the content of it. AOP and advice are ways for your module to change the services and the service methods that are called. So the form service, every time the form service is called, this class in my module will be called, and that will allow me to change what is returned by certain methods in the form service, or just let me know whenever certain methods are called in the form service. a module can require that certain privileges be in OpenMRS's database, and when your module is loaded up, the privileges are looped over, and if this privilege is not in the user's current database, it's added with this name and this description. Very similar with global properties. If your module requires that some property be, if some property exists in the database in order to be used and edited, you list it off here, and if this doesn't exist, it adds it with this property name, a value, and a description. This module ID is pulling from the ID up here. That's done by ant. When ant compiles up the module, it will replace these @ package signs with the correct defined value. DWR is a Java to JavaScript and the reverse translation. It allows you to call Java methods from JavaScript and makes Ajax a lot easier in the web interface. Servlets can be defined and accessed through a URL similar to this, where page context is typically just the string OpenMRS. Messages files are internationalization files that allow you to define the strings that your module will load and define those in many different languages. So that was a config file. These are the messages properties files that were referenced. If we look at them, they're simply a key value pair, and they all have the same, only one key in them right now, and translated into 3 separate languages. The module application context is really just a Spring application context that your module can define, and it allows you to map your JSP pages to controllers to let you run some Java code behind a JSP page. So this URL mapping creates this link inside of OpenMRS. So if this, once you load your module and you go to this link here, this controller is what's behind that. And every page has an object that is the form backing object. It's the object that's behind every form. And for this controller, it looks like there's a list of patients that is the object behind the form. And this JSP page will have access to the object through the name the patient list. The form view just references where inside of OpenMRS to look for the actual JSP page. So it would be module/basic module form.jsp. So we'll see that here. And the success view is just where to redirect back to after a form is submitted successfully. And that is we happen to be going back to the same form that we started at, but that's not necessary. You can go back to a listing of forms or something else. So if we look at the SQL Diff file, this is where your module is able to create tables in the database and change existing tables. And each element here is a different SQL block. So if we pretend like there was a create table statement in this first one, and then later on I come along and I forgot to add a column to that. We we'd have an alter statement down here. And the way these blocks work are they're looped over one at a time at module startup and checked against this version number. So if this doesn't exist and I run this module for the very first time, it'll go through here, say of course there's no 100 version number, I'll create the table. Now let's say after I've done that, a new module's released, I download the new one, it'll look at this first diff, it'll say, oh, you already have 100, I'm not going to run that. It'll come down to the next diff, say you do not have version 101, I'll run this. It allows you to incrementally change and upgrade your module's database to keep all of your users up to date in a very simple way. The source folder contains all of your non-web Java files. Those were things like the Activator that I showed you earlier, and your service classes would go in here along with the database DAOs that go along with that. Any AOP that you would define can go in advice. This is all definable by you. None of these are a required structure. The test folder contains your JUnit tests that will go here, and you're able to run those as JUnit tests in your module. The web folder contains the JSP files and portlets that are loaded into OpenMRS. The resources folder contains CSS files and JavaScript files and image files that are not processed by Spring. All the JSP and portlets are processed by Spring, so they're treated slightly differently than resources. Web/source contains all of the web Java files. So if we look down here, we'll see the controller that I was talking about earlier. And this controller just creates the patient list object as the form backing object. Classpath is an Eclipse file that just tells Eclipse where to look for certain jar files. So in order for Eclipse to compile my project on the fly, it needs the Spring jar file, it needs the Servlet API jar file, and the Hibernate jar file, and so I link to those, and they are in libcommon because those jar files all exist in OpenMRS already, so my module does not have to ship with them. The .project file is again an Eclipse file that just has metadata about my project, and the build.xml is an Ant script that contains targets for different tasks to run. So if we look in the Ant view, we can drag this build.xml over into it and see what targets are available. So there's a clean, which will erase the dist and build folders and rebuild them. Compile module simply creates class files. It's typically done by Eclipse on the fly, so you don't need that one. Deploy web will copy your JSP and CSS files over into Tomcat, and it takes about 2 seconds, but that requires that you have loaded your module into Tomcat already, into OpenMRS. So if you're working with just web files, this deploy web is a very convenient target. It's a lot faster than running package module, which will create the OMOD file here in the dist folder, and you would take that OMOD file, go to the administration screen of OpenMRS and load it up. The only other target here is the package jar target, and that will create a jar file of your module that you can include in other modules or include in other source code.